My brother Tomas called at 5:47 in the morning on a Tuesday in July, and the first thing he said was, "Don't come home." Not hello. Not are you awake. Not sorry for calling so early. Just that. 3 words that sounded like he'd been rehearsing them for hours. And maybe he had. His voice was flat the way it gets when he's decided something and doesn't want to be argued with the same voice he used when he told our mother he was enlisting. The same voice he used when he told me he'd taken the TSA job in El Paso instead of finishing his last semester at NMSU. Tomas doesn't ask. He announces. And when he announces, his voice goes still like the surface of a lake with something heavy sinking beneath it. I was in a Motel 6 in Deming, New Mexico, 73 miles west of Las Cruces, and about 110 from El Paso. Sitting on the edge of a bed that smelled like industrial detergent. My mother was in the next room with my little brother Diego, who was 14 and had slept through the entire previous day's drive from Tucson without once removing his earbuds. We were supposed to be going home. That was the whole point of the trip. 3 days driving east from my aunt's place in Tucson back to our apartment in El Paso. Taking our time because Mama's back couldn't handle more than 4 hours in the Corolla without stopping. Tomas was supposed to meet us at the apartment Wednesday evening. He'd saved 2 days off. We were going to have carne asada on the balcony and pretend we were a family that did that regularly. "What do you mean, don't come home?" I said. "Elena, listen to me." He never called me by my full name. I was Lena since I was 4, or Lenny when he wanted something. Elena meant the conversation wasn't a conversation. It was a briefing. Something happened at the airport last night. I can't tell you all of it, but there are people sick here, not regular sick. I watched a man bite through a security officer's forearm at gate B14 at 2 in the morning, and it took 4 agents and a taser to get him down. And by the time they did, the officer was seizing on the floor, and the man's teeth were Lena. His teeth were still going. Like chewing was all that was left. I didn't say anything. I remember the air conditioner in the room cycling on, that low mechanical groan, and thinking about how the curtains were the same brown as the bedspread, and wondering why motels do that. "They locked the terminal down," he said. "Customs and Border Protection has the whole East Concourse sealed. There are military vehicles on the tarmac, not National Guard, federal. They're wearing full biological gear. Lena, I'm watching a C-130 unload body bags at 5 in the morning. Not stretchers, bags. Thomas, there are 13 people in a holding area on the 2nd floor of the international terminal who were passengers on a flight from Lima that landed at midnight. They are all restrained. 3 of them have been restrained since about 1 a.m., and they have not stopped moving. Not stopped. Not for a second. The one nearest the window has dislocated both shoulders, pulling against the zip ties, and she is still pulling. The air conditioner cycled off. The silence in that room was like a hand pressing down on my chest. I'm telling you this because in about 4 hours, they're going to shut down I-10 between Las Cruces and El Paso. I heard it on the CBP channel. They're going to close the highway, and they are not going to reopen it. Do not come east. Do not come to El Paso. Take Mama and Diego and drive north. Go to Santa Fe. Go to Albuquerque. Go anywhere that is not here. What about you? The pause was 3 seconds. I've replayed it so many times I could measure it with a metronome. I'm going to stay on shift, he said. They need people who know the building. Tomas, just leave. Just get in your truck and... My truck is in long-term parking behind a barricade that has 2 Humvees parked across it. I'm not leaving the terminal, Lena. That's not one of the options. I sat on that bed for maybe 90 seconds after he hung up. The phone was still warm against my ear. I could hear a television through the wall Diego's room, some cartoon he'd left on all night. Tinny laughter bleeding through the drywall like a signal from a parallel universe where nothing had changed. Then I stood up and knocked on my mother's door. Mama opened it in her bathrobe with her reading glasses pushed up into her hair, holding a styrofoam cup of the motel's lobby coffee. She looked at my face, and the cup paused halfway to her mouth. What happened? Not a question, a diagnosis. My mother was a nurse's aide for 22 years at University Medical Center. She spent 2 decades reading faces across triage desks, and she read mine now the way she'd read 1,000 others, not waiting for language, but watching the architecture of the expression for the clinical information beneath it. Tomas called. Something's happening at the airport. He says we can't go to El Paso. She set the coffee on the dresser, removed her glasses, and folded them. Every motion deliberate. Surgical economy. What kind of something? He said people are sick. He said the military is there. He said they're closing I-10 in 4 hours. Is he safe? He's inside the terminal. He said he can't leave. Her hand went flat against the dresser. Not a slap, just contact. Like she needed something solid beneath her palm to hold herself in the coordinate system of reality. She closed her eyes for 2 full breaths. When she opened them, she wasn't my mother anymore. She was the woman who had worked 12-hour shifts in the emergency department during the swine flu surge of 2009 and had come home every night smelling like Purell and silence. "Wake your brother," she said. "Pack the car. We leave in 20 minutes. "Mama, he said to go north." "I heard you. Santa Fe. My friend Rosa is in Santa Fe. I'll call her from the road. Go." Diego didn't understand. I shook him awake, and he pulled the earbuds out with that 14-year-old scowl that treats every interruption like a constitutional violation. "We're leaving," I said. "Now, pack your bag. We're not supposed to check out until 11. Diego, pack your bag." Something in my voice caught him. His face shifted, the scowl dissolving into something younger and more uncertain. He'd looked exactly like that at 9 years old when the power went out during a thunderstorm, and he'd sat perfectly still in the dark until someone came for him. My little brother's fear response wasn't noise, it was stillness. He went completely quiet, and he packed his bag in 4 minutes without asking another question. We were in the Corolla by 6:22. Mama in the passenger seat, rosary already in her hands, lips moving without sound. Diego in the back with his backpack hugged against his chest. I drove. I'd been driving the family since I was 17, because Mama's back spasms made long distances dangerous, and because Thomas was always working, and because someone had to, so it was me. It was always me. The one who isn't good enough to lead, but is reliable enough to steer. I-10 westbound was empty at that hour. The desert opened up flat and tan and infinite ahead of us, the sun coming up behind us and throwing our shadow forward like an advance scout. I watched the rearview mirror for military vehicles. I watched for roadblocks. I watched for anything that confirmed what Tomas had told me. There was nothing. Just highway and scrub, and the pale geometry of distant mountains. The world looked exactly like a Tuesday. At 6:40, Mama's phone buzzed. A text from Tomas. She read it silently, then held the screen so I could see it at a red light in Columbus. 4 words. They sealed the terminal. Below it, a second message, sent 30 seconds later. "Tell Diego." I said, "Be brave." Mama locked the phone and put it face down in her lap. Her lips kept moving over the rosary. She didn't look at me. I drove north. The first 60 miles felt like a lie I was telling myself. The highway was ordinary. Gas stations were open. A truck stop outside Hatch had its neon breakfast sign lit, and I could see a waitress moving behind the window, and I thought, maybe he was wrong. Maybe it was a fight. Maybe someone was on drugs at the airport, and he panicked. I was constructing a version of reality that didn't require my brother to be trapped inside a sealed building with people whose shoulders had come apart and whose mouths hadn't stopped. Diego broke the silence around mile 40. Why did Tomas say not to come home? Something at the airport. He wants us to be safe while they handle it. Handle what? I don't know yet, mijo. Is he coming later? Mama answered that one. Yes, she said, without turning around. He's coming later. Her voice was perfectly steady and absolutely closed, like a door latched from the inside, and Diego knew better than to knock on it. I found the first broadcast at 7:15 a.m. on a Crucis News radio station. The anchor's voice had that particular quality, controlled but leaning forward, the way they sound during wildfire evacuations when they're reading copy that scares them. El Paso International Airport had been temporarily closed due to a security incident. All flights diverted. I-10 eastbound closed between Las Cruces and the Texas state line due to emergency operations. Residents were advised to shelter in place. That phrase, shelter in place. I'd heard it during dust storms and during the pandemic, and it had always felt abstract, civic, like something that happened to a population rather than to a person. Now it was on the radio, and my brother was inside whatever they were sheltering from. By 7:30, the radio station was looping. Same bulletin, same phrases, same anchor. But every third cycle there was a small addition, like sediment accumulating. Reports of multiple casualties. Then, National Guard deployment confirmed in the El Paso metropolitan area. Then, residents are urged not to approach the airport complex under any circumstances. Diego leaned forward between the seats. Lena, what does multiple casualties mean at an airport? It means something bad happened, and they're being careful with information. It means people died. Yes. How many? I don't know. Is Tomas? Tomas told us to drive north. That's what we're doing. He sat back. I watched him in the mirror. His face was working through something, not fear yet, but the approaching shape of it, the way you can see weather coming across a desert valley before the first drop falls. He put his earbuds in. Then he took them out. Then he put them in again. His hands couldn't decide where to be. At 7:48, my phone lit up on the center console. Not Tomas. A notification from a news app I'd never bothered to delete. The headline was a single line. Developing mass casualty event at El Paso International Airport. FAA grounds all regional flights. Mama saw it. I know she saw it because her hand moved from the rosary to my forearm and squeezed once, hard, then returned. She didn't say a word. I called Thomas at 7:52. It rang 6 times and went to voicemail. His recorded voice casual, almost bored. The voice of a man who doesn't expect important calls said, "It's Thomas, leave it." I didn't leave anything. What do you leave? "Hey, the news says mass casualty, just checking in." I hung up and called again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. Mama said, "He's working. He'll call when he can." She said it the way she used to say the doctor will be out in a minute to families in the waiting room, not because she knew, but because the sentence itself was a kind of infrastructure, a beam laid across a gap to keep people walking forward. I turned off the radio. The silence in the car was different now. It had texture. It had weight. It sat between us like a fourth passenger, breathing. I merged onto I-25 northbound toward Truth or Consequences, and the desert swallowed us whole. Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, is a town that renamed itself after a game show in 1950 and has been living inside that strange joke ever since. We pulled into the Chevron station on Main Street at 8:45 a.m. because the fuel light had been on for 12 miles. And because I needed to stand on solid ground for 3 minutes and remember what it felt like to exist in a body that wasn't vibrating with dread. The gas station was normal. A man in a stained Carhartt jacket was filling a dually truck. A teenage girl behind the counter was watching something on her phone with the volume too loud. A dog was sleeping in a strip of shade beside the ice machine. The morning was already hot, 92 degrees by the bank sign across the street, and the air smelled like gasoline and creosote and dust, which is what New Mexico always smells like in July. And I wanted to crawl inside that normalcy and pull it over me like a blanket. Diego went to the bathroom. Mama stayed in the car, phone in her hand, texting Rosa in Santa Fe. I filled the tank and watched the numbers climb on the pump and tried to organize my thoughts into something functional. What I knew. Tomas was inside a sealed airport terminal. The military was present. People were injured or dead. The highway was closed. He had told us to run. What I didn't know, everything else. The man in the Carhartt jacket finished pumping and walked over to me. He was maybe 55, sun-damaged skin, hands that looked like they'd spent decades gripping tools. "You coming from down south?" he asked. "Deming." "Heard they closed the 10. That's what the radio said. He looked south down Main Street as though he could see 100 miles to the border. "My nephew drives freight out of El Paso. Called me an hour ago. Said there are Humvees at every on-ramp, and they're turning back civilian vehicles at the Mesilla exit." He paused. Said he heard gunfire from the airport. Not like a shooting, like sustained fire, like a firefight. The gas pump clicked off. I didn't move. He said people were running on the access road near the terminal. Not running like scared, running like wrong, like the way they moved was wrong. "I don't know what that means," I said, because I didn't want to know what it meant. "Neither do I." He pulled his cap lower. "But I'm driving to my daughter's in Magdalena, and I'm doing it now. You might want to get where you're going." He got in his truck and left. I stood at the pump with my hand still on the nozzle and the receipt printing and the dog still sleeping by the ice machine. And I understood for the first time that the thing Tomas had described, the biting, the restrained passengers, the bodies that didn't stop, was going to reach beyond the airport. That it had maybe already reached beyond it. That the highway closure wasn't containment. It was an admission that containment had already failed. Diego came out of the bathroom holding a bag of Takis he'd bought with quarters from the floorboard of the car. He looked at me and stopped. "What?" he said. "Nothing. Get in." "You look weird." "Get in the car, Diego." He got in. I got in. I pulled out of the station and headed north on I-25. And in the mirror, I watched Truth or Consequences shrink to a smear of buildings and then disappear entirely behind a curve of brown hills. And I thought about how the man had said the way they moved was wrong, and how Tomas had said she is still pulling, and how both of them had reached for the same inadequate language because the adequate language didn't exist yet. Language for a thing you haven't named is always borrowed from the nearest familiar horror, bent to fit, and it never quite fits. And the gap between the word and the thing is where the real fear lives. Mama's phone was silent. Mine was silent. Tomas was silent. The highway ran north between red bluffs and the river, and I drove. At 9:30 a.m., the internet broke open. Not gradually, not with the careful institutional language of the radio bulletins. A video appeared on Twitter or X, whatever it is now, shot from the upper floor of the airport parking structure. The footage was 38 seconds long, and it was shaking so badly it was hard to parse. But what it showed was a line of soldiers firing into a crowd of people crossing the tarmac. And the people were not falling the way people fall. And the ones who did fall were getting up. And some of them were getting up without arms and still walking forward. Diego found it first. He was in the back seat with the phone angled away from Mama, and I heard his breathing change, a short, sharp inhalation like he'd been shoved into cold water, and he said, "Lena," in a voice that made him sound 7 instead of 14. "Put the phone down." "Lena, there's a video from the airport." I said, "Put it down. The people in it they're not." Mama turned around. "Diego, give me the phone." He handed it to her. She watched the video once with the sound off, her face completely neutral. The way I imagined she'd looked when they wheeled impossible things through the ER doors, the face that absorbs the information without letting it propagate. Then she closed the app, turned the phone off, and put it in the glove compartment. "That's enough," she said. "We know enough." "Mama, those people I saw. They were getting shot, and they didn't." "I saw, Diego. We don't need to discuss what I saw." Her voice was compressed steel, not angry, sealed. She was protecting him from the conversation the way she'd protected him from 100 conversations. Before the divorce, the bills, the time Tomas came home with his face rearranged after a fight in Juarez, absorbing it into her own body so it wouldn't reach his. But this was too big to absorb. I could see it in the set of her shoulders, the way her hand trembled when she replaced the rosary in her lap. She had seen the video, and she understood what it meant. And what it meant was that her oldest son was locked inside a building surrounded by things that didn't stop when they were shot. And there was nothing she could do about it from a moving car on a highway in the middle of New Mexico. I called Tomas again. Voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I called a third time, and this time, it didn't ring at all. Straight to the recorded message, which meant his phone was dead or destroyed or turned off. And each of those possibilities was its own species of terrible. "His phone's off," I said. Mama nodded. Just nodded. The highway was getting busier. Not panicked. Not yet, but denser. I noticed more vehicles with luggage strapped to roofs. A family in a Suburban with Arizona plates had a German Shepherd pressed against the rear window, panting. A man on a motorcycle passed us, going 90, with a duffel bag bungeed across the seat behind him. Everyone was moving north. Everyone had the same blank, purposeful expression. The expression of people who have received information they haven't finished processing, but who are acting on it anyway, because the body decides before the mind does. At 10:15, FEMA issued a regional emergency declaration for southern New Mexico and far west Texas. It came through as an emergency alert on every phone in the car simultaneously, that piercing tone that sounds like the noise a machine makes when it's asking you to pay attention to its dying. And Diego flinched so hard, his knee hit the back of my seat. The text said, "Shelter in place. Avoid travel on a 10 corridor. Military operations in progress. Do not approach El Paso metro area." Mama read it, closed it, and said, "Keep driving." I kept driving. What else was there? My brother was inside the thing, and we were outside it. And between us was 100 miles of desert and a military blockade and a silence that was growing heavier by the minute. accumulating mass like a star about to collapse. We stopped in Socorro to use the bathroom at a McDonald's that was still serving breakfast, as though the concept of a normal Tuesday hadn't been amputated at the root. There was a line at the drive-thru. A woman inside was wiping down tables. The soda machine hummed. I stood in the lobby waiting for Diego, and I watched a man eat an Egg McMuffin while scrolling through his phone with his other hand. And his face cycled through an expression I would see hundreds of times into the coming days, the expression of someone encountering the unbelievable while holding a familiar object, the cognitive dissonance of atrocity viewed over breakfast. My phone buzzed. Not Tomas. My friend Priya, who worked at a call center in Albuquerque. Are you safe? Where are you? Socorro. Heading to Santa Fe. Elena, they're saying it's not just El Paso. There's something in Juarez, too. The border is closed. Like, completely closed. They moved tanks onto the bridges. Tanks. My cousin sent a photo. Actual tanks on the Stanton Street Bridge. I leaned against the counter and closed my eyes. The McDonald's smelled like grease and industrial soap, and the carpet cleaner they use that smells like synthetic pine. And all of those smells were so ordinary that they hurt. Is your family okay? She asked. My brother is at the airport. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, oh God, Elena. I didn't respond. Diego came out of the bathroom and tugged my sleeve. Can I get food? Yeah. Get Mama something too. He ordered with the mechanical efficiency of a teenager who has eaten at this restaurant 400 times. 2 McGriddles, a hash brown, and orange juice. He carried the bag to the car with both hands, like it was something fragile. I watched him cross the parking lot skinny, slope-shouldered, his father's jaw and his mother's walk, and thought about Thomas's text. Tell Diego, I said, be brave. You don't say that when you think you'll see someone again soon. You say that when you're putting something into the record. A last deposit. I sat in the driver's seat and ate nothing, and gripped the steering wheel with both hands, and felt the vinyl hot beneath my palms. The sun was fully up now, and the temperature was climbing toward 100. And the parking lot shimmered with heat mirages that looked like shallow water where no water existed. Mama ate 2 bites of the McGriddle and wrapped the rest in the bag. She was looking at her phone. She'd retrieved it from the glove compartment when I wasn't watching, and her face was doing something I'd never seen it do. Not crying, not shutting down. Something between those things, a kind of held fracture. The expression of a plate that is cracked but hasn't separated yet because the pieces are still touching. Mama. She locked the phone. There are reports from Juarez, from the hospitals. They're saying the same thing Tomas said. About the biting. About everything. The biting, the restraints, the way they don't stop. She paused. There's a nurse at Paso del Norte General. She posted a video from inside the emergency room. I'm not going to describe it. Okay? It is not something that can be contained at an airport, Lena. It is in the city. I didn't say anything because she was right, and saying she was right would make it more real. And more real was not a direction I wanted to travel in. Rosa says we can stay with her as long as we need to. She has space. She has food. How far to Santa Fe? 3 hours from here. Then we'll be there by 1:30. Drive carefully. The roads will get worse. She was right about that, too. North of Socorro, the highway began to thicken. Not with traffic exactly, but with urgency, a quality of motion that was different from commuting, different from travel. People were not going somewhere. They were leaving somewhere. The direction was away, and away was north. And we were part of it now, particles in a current we hadn't chosen. I merged and drove, and watched the mirror, and held the wheel, and did not call my brother's phone again because I couldn't face the silence that would answer. Rosa Gutierrez Padilla lived in a small adobe house on Agua Fria Street in Santa Fe, 3 blocks from a church and 2 blocks from a tienda that sold bulk green chili by the 5-pound bag. She was 61, a retired school librarian, and she had been my mother's closest friend since they worked together at a hospital fundraiser in 1998. She met us at the door with her arms already open, and she held my mother for a long time without speaking, and over Mama's shoulder her eyes found mine. And they were wet and serious, and full of the kind of knowledge that doesn't announce itself. "Come in. I have beds. I have food. The television is on in the living room, but I can turn it off." "Leave it on," Mama said. The living room was small and cool and dark, the adobe walls 2 feet thick, and the television was tuned to CNN. And what was on CNN was no longer a developing story. It was a developed one. The chyron said, "State of emergency. Multiple cities in Texas and New Mexico." And the anchor was interviewing a FEMA official whose eyes kept shifting off camera in a way that made it obvious he was receiving information in real time that he was not sharing with the audience. El Paso was under full military quarantine. The airport had been the word they used was lost. Not closed, not evacuated. Lost. As in no longer under operational control. As in the people inside it were either dead or not dead in a way that was worse than dead. The footage they were showing was aerial, shot from a helicopter at a distance that made the figures on the ground look like insects. And even at that distance, you could see that some of them were moving in a way that was categorically wrong, lurching, swarming, converging on points of light or sound or life with a directionality that had nothing to do with thought and everything to do with appetite. Diego sat on the floor 3 feet from the screen and watched without blinking. I should have turned it off. I should have been the older sister who protects. But I was 23, and my brother was inside that aerial shot somewhere, and I couldn't stop watching either. Scanning the insect figures for one that moved like Thomas, that particular forward lean, shoulders slightly hunched. The walk of a man who'd carried roofing shingles up ladders as a summer job before the TSA hired him. "Have you heard from him?" Rosa asked quietly, handing me a glass of water. "Not since 6 this morning." "What did he say?" "He said don't come home. He said they sealed the terminal." Rosa sat down across from me at the kitchen table. The kitchen was separated from the living room by a half wall, so we could still hear the broadcast, the anchor's voice, the FEMA official's non-answers, the ambient dread that television manufactures out of repetition and graphics. "There is something I need to tell you," Rosa said. "My nephew Gabriel is a paramedic in Las Cruces. He was called to the university this morning for what they told him was a mass intoxication. A dormitory. Summer session students. And it was not intoxication. He said 6 students were restrained on gurneys, and they had bitten through their own lips trying to reach the medics. He said one of them had no pulse and was still moving. He called me 20 minutes ago and he was driving north. He left his ambulance at the dormitory because his partner was bitten, and he did not trust what his partner was becoming. She said this with the flat precision of a woman who had spent 30 years organizing information for other people, cataloging, shelving, making the chaotic retrievable. And I understood that she was telling me not as gossip, but as data. She was updating my map. The infection was not only in El Paso, it was in Las Cruces. It was moving north along the same highway we'd just driven. The margin of safety we'd built with 3 hours of driving was not a wall. It was a head start, and head starts shrink. By 3 p.m., the television had become a different animal, the careful institutional language of the morning. Security incident, shelter in place, ongoing operations, had been replaced by something rawer. Reporters were crying on camera. Not the anchors, not yet, but the field correspondents, the ones close enough to smell it. A woman broadcasting from a rooftop in central El Paso broke down mid-sentence, and behind her you could see smoke rising from multiple points in the city. And in the streets below, shapes that moved like currents of dark water flowing between buildings. They had a name for it now. They were calling it the Reeves pathogen, after a Dr. Alan Reeves at the CDC who had apparently identified the viral strain 3 days earlier from samples out of Lima, Peru, 3 days before the El Paso flight landed. 3 days during which someone somewhere had decided that grounding a commercial airliner was more disruptive than the small but manageable risk of a novel pathogen. 3 days that had cost a city. Mama sat on the couch and did not move. She had stopped checking her phone. She had stopped praying the rosary. She was watching the screen with an expression I had never seen on her. Not grief, not shock, but a kind of furious attention. As if she could will the camera to find the airport, find the terminal, find the gate, find her son. Diego had retreated to the spare bedroom Rosa had set up for him. I checked on him once and found him lying on the bed with his earbuds in, staring at the ceiling, one hand opening and closing around the strap of his backpack. He looked at me when I came in. "Is Tomas dead?" The question hit me like a car, not because it was unexpected, but because it was honest in a way that our family, careful, Catholic, bound by the protocols of managed feeling, did not permit. Diego was 14, and he had asked the question that Mama and I were building elaborate architectures of silence around. "I don't know," I said. "But you think maybe." "I don't know, Diego. I really don't. If the airport is, if they said it's lost. People survive things. Tomas knows that building. He knows every corridor and every service door and every..." "Stop." He pulled out one earbud. "Don't do that. Don't do the thing where you make it sound okay when it's not okay. Mama does that. Don't you do it too." He put the earbud back in and turned to the wall. I stood in the doorway for a moment, then went back to the kitchen and sat at Rosa's table and pressed my palms flat against the wood and breathed. He was right. I was doing the thing, the family thing, the thing where we narrate the acceptable version of events to each other as a form of mutual anesthesia. Each of us maintaining a fiction we all know is fiction. And the maintaining is the point. And the fiction is the architecture. And inside it, we can keep functioning because the alternative is to say out loud what we actually believe, which is that Tomas is probably dead. And if he's not dead, he's trapped. And if he's trapped, there is no one coming to get him because the people who would come are the same people who sealed the building in the first place. At 3:47 p.m., the governor of New Mexico declared a statewide emergency and activated the full National Guard. At 4:12, FEMA upgraded the declaration to a federal disaster zone covering southern New Mexico and far west Texas. At 4:30, the cell networks in El Paso went dark entirely, not congested, not slow, but dead. And every call to every number in the 915 area code returned a tone that meant nothing was there anymore. I tried Thomas one more time. The call didn't even attempt to connect. Just a flat, empty tone, like calling a number that had never existed. Rosa made dinner. Rice, beans, green chili stew. She made it the way you make food during a crisis. Not because anyone is hungry, but because the act of cooking is a form of argument against chaos. I ate because she'd made it. Mama ate because I was watching. Diego ate because he was 14 and the body's needs are ruthless and indifferent to grief. We ate in the kitchen with the television off. in a silence that held all of us like water. That night, I couldn't sleep. Rosa had given me the couch in the living room, a heavy Navajo blanket draped over it, and the cushions smelled like lavender and old paper, and the room was cool and dark and silent. And none of it mattered, because every time I closed my eyes, I heard Thomas's voice saying, "She is still pulling," and I saw the aerial footage of figures converging on light. At 1 a.m., I turned the television on with the volume almost at zero and sat on the floor with my back against the couch, the way Diego had sat that afternoon. The screen was divided into a grid of live feeds: El Paso, Juarez, Las Cruces, a place in Arizona I didn't recognize, and each feed showed a variation of the same image. Military lights illuminating streets that should have been empty but were not. The crawl at the bottom had numbers now. Estimated infected in the El Paso metropolitan area, 40,000. Estimated fatalities, unknown. Estimated containment timeline, none provided. I noticed on the Las Cruces feed that the camera was positioned on the roof of a building I recognized, the hotel and suites near the university, where Tomas and I had once eaten overpriced nachos during a visit to campus. The street below was empty except for a single figure standing beneath a streetlight. The figure was a woman in a hospital gown. She was standing perfectly still, which was somehow worse than movement. The camera held on her for 15 seconds, and then she turned her head not toward a sound, not toward anything visible, just turned it, the way a sensor sweeps, and she began to walk. I turned off the television. In the kitchen, I found Mama sitting at the table in the dark. She was not praying. She was not looking at her phone. She was just sitting, hands folded, staring at the wall. And when I sat down across from her, she didn't startle, which meant she'd heard me coming, which meant she'd been awake and listening the whole time. "You should sleep," I said. "So should you." We sat in silence for a while. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed on Agua Fria Street, headlights briefly painting the kitchen wall with light that moved across it like a searchlight and disappeared. "When your father left," Mama said, "I didn't sleep for 5 weeks. I would lie in bed and calculate. Bills, hours, shifts, grocery costs. My mind wouldn't stop running numbers because the numbers were the only thing I could control. I couldn't make him come back. I couldn't make the pain stop. But I could calculate whether we could survive on what I earned. And if the numbers worked, I could close my eyes." Did the numbers work? Barely. But barely was enough. She unfolded her hands and placed them flat on the table, mirroring me. "I am doing that now. Calculating. But there are no numbers for this. There is no formula for whether your son is alive inside a building you cannot reach. There is no math that resolves it. Mama, I know what you're going to say. That he's resourceful. That he knows the building. That he could have found a room and barricaded it. I know, Mia, because I have already told myself all of those things. And they are not calculations. They are prayers dressed up as logic." Her voice cracked on the last word. Just a hairline fracture, barely audible. But it was the first crack I'd heard from her since the morning. And it terrified me more than anything on the television. My mother's composure was load-bearing. It held the family's weight. If it fractured, the structure above it, Diego's fragile quiet, my functional driving, the whole forward motion of our retreat, would have nothing to rest on. I reached across the table and put my hand on hers. She curled her fingers around mine and squeezed. And we sat like that in Rosa's kitchen. In the dark, in Santa Fe, 260 miles from the place where Tomas was or was not alive. and neither of us said another word until the light came through the window and turned the wall the color of rust. The second day was when Santa Fe stopped being safe and started being temporary. It began with Gabriel. Rosa's nephew arrived at 6 a.m. in a Las Cruces Fire Department paramedic uniform, still smeared with something dark across the left shoulder. He was 28, thick-necked, shaved head, and his hands were shaking so badly that Rosa had to unlock the door for him because he couldn't manage the knob. He sat at the kitchen table. That table was becoming the center of everything. The place where information arrived and was processed. And Rosa brought him water, and he drank the entire glass without pausing, and then set it down and said, "It's in Albuquerque." The word landed in the kitchen like a stone thrown through glass. "How?" Rosa said. "How do you think?" People drove. The same thing we did. The same thing everyone did. You get warned, or you see it starting, and you get in your car and you drive. And some of the people who drive are already carrying it. They don't know. It incubates. A bite can take anywhere from 20 minutes to 6 hours before the turn. And in that window, the person feels fine. They feel scared. They feel adrenaline. They feel the bite hurting, but they feel human. So they drive. And then they stop feeling human somewhere on I-25, and their car drifts into a ditch, or they pull into a rest stop, and they turn in the bathroom, and they bite someone in the parking lot. And that person drives another 60 miles before they turn. He explained this with the clinical cadence of a man who has rehearsed a briefing for the entire drive. His eyes were focused on the glass as though it were the most important object in the world. "I treated a woman outside Belen," he said, "about 2 hours ago. She was on the shoulder of the highway, sitting against her car, holding her arm. She said a man had attacked her at a gas station in Socorro, just lunged at her, bit her forearm through her jacket. She'd driven 40 miles with the wound wrapped in a t-shirt." "And?" I said, because the "and" was the thing that mattered. "And I cleaned the wound, and I bandaged it, and I told her to drive to the nearest hospital. And she got back in her car and drove north, toward Albuquerque, toward 400,000 people." He turned the glass in his hands. Her pupils were already wrong. I noticed it while I was bandaging her. The left one was dilated wider than the right, and they weren't responding to light the same way. It's a neurological sign. I've seen it in stroke patients. But this wasn't a stroke. He looked up. "I think I sent an infected woman into Albuquerque. I think I bandaged her arm, and I told her she'd be fine, and I sent her into a city. Because I didn't know. I didn't know what to look for, because nobody told us what to look for, because 3 days ago, this thing didn't have a name." Rosa put her hand on his shoulder. He didn't react. He was somewhere inside himself, running the scenario forward, watching it branch. "Albuquerque is 60 miles from here," I said. 62, Gabriel said. "And the thing about this pathogen, the thing I learned in the last 12 hours that I wish I hadn't, is that it doesn't need to overwhelm a city. It just needs 3 or 4 entry points. 3 or 4 people who walked into grocery stores or emergency rooms or bus stations. And each of them bites one person who bites 2 people who each bite 2 more, and within 6 hours you have a geometric progression that no police department on Earth is staffed to contain." Mama had been standing in the doorway. I don't know how long she'd been listening. "So Santa Fe is not safe," she said. Not a question. Gabriel turned to her. "Nowhere south of Colorado is safe. Maybe nowhere south of Wyoming. I don't know where the ceiling is. I don't think anyone does." Mama nodded once. Then she walked to the spare bedroom, opened the door, and said, "Diego, pack your bag." The argument happened fast, and it happened in the kitchen. And it was the kind of argument that families have when the stakes are no longer theoretical. Not raised voices, not drama, but compressed, functional disagreement conducted under time pressure. Mama wanted to drive north immediately. Colorado, Denver if possible, Pueblo if not. Get ahead of the spread. She had the car. She had a full tank. She had $300 in cash and a credit card that might still work. Rosa wanted to stay. She was 61. She had a house, supplies, thick walls, a neighborhood she knew. She didn't want to be on a highway with half the state. Gabriel wanted to go west. Farmington, or maybe the Navajo Nation, where the population density dropped to almost nothing and the spread would stall for lack of bodies. I wanted to go back. I said it, and the kitchen went silent. Not stunned silent, but heavy silent, the silence of people who heard what they expected and hoped they wouldn't. Go back where? Mama said. El Paso. Elena. I know the building too. I visited Thomas at work 4 times. I know where the service corridors are. I know where the employee break rooms. Elena, the airport is gone. You don't know that. They said lost. Lost doesn't mean everyone's dead. It means they lost control of the building. There could be people inside. There could be rooms. Tomas knows every lock code on the East Concourse. And the military has a perimeter around the entire metro area, and they are shooting anything that approaches the line. Gabriel just told us. The perimeter has gaps. Every perimeter has gaps. The desert is full of them. The infected. They are in the desert. They walked out of the city and into the open ground. And they are between here and there, and you want to drive into them. Mama's voice hadn't risen. That was the terrifying part. She was calm. She was the emergency department voice, the triage voice, the voice that prioritizes because prioritizing is how you save the most lives. And she was prioritizing. And her priority was the children in front of her, not the son behind the line. He's your son, I said. And I heard how it sounded, even as I said it, accusatory, ugly, the kind of sentence that draws blood because it's aimed at the place where someone is already bleeding. Yes, he is my son, and you are my daughter, and Diego is my son. And I cannot drive south to look for one child while risking the 2 I still have. Diego was in the hallway. I could see his shadow on the tile floor. He was listening, motionless, in that animal stillness that was his way of being afraid. He would come for us, I said. Yes, he would. And it would be wrong. And I would be angry at him for it, the same way I'm telling you now that it is wrong, and you will be angry at me. And you can be angry. That's allowed. But we are going north. Rosa spoke. Patricia, I'm staying. Mama turned to her. Something passed between them, 30 years of friendship compressed into a glance, and Mama nodded. I know. I'm not going to argue with you. You shouldn't. I'm too old and too stubborn, and this is my house. Will you be safe? I'll be as safe as anyone. Gabriel will stay with me. We'll board the windows. I have food for 3 weeks. Gabriel looked like he wanted to argue with this assignment, then didn't. Something in Rosa's certainty was gravitational. She had made her decision with the placid authority of a woman who had cataloged 1,000 endings on library shelves and understood that not all of them were tragedies. Mama kissed Rosa. Not on the cheek, on the forehead, the way you bless a child or a saint. Rosa held her arms and said, Go. Call me when you can. Take the water bottles from the pantry. We packed the car in 11 minutes. By 7:15 a.m. on the second day, we were on the road again, heading north, leaving behind the last place that had felt like shelter. The drive north from Santa Fe to the Colorado border is about 200 miles through high desert and low mountains. Through tiny towns with names like Española and Ojo Caliente and Tres Piedras that sound like lines from a poem about a country that no longer exists. On a normal day, it's a beautiful drive. Quiet two-lane highways, mesa views, the sky so enormous above you that it makes the human world look like a footnote. On the second day of the outbreak, it was a funnel. Every vehicle in northern New Mexico was pointed in the same direction. Highway 285 north from Santa Fe was bumper to bumper by 8 a.m. Not gridlocked, not yet, but dense. The whole column moving at 35 miles an hour with the desperate patience of people who understand that stopping is worse than crawling. Diego sat in the back and watched the other cars. He had developed a taxonomy. "That one's got camping stuff," he'd say, pointing at a Subaru with a roof rack piled high. "That one's military. Look at the plates." A green pickup with DOD plates, 3 cars ahead. 2 men in civilian clothes, but with the posture of people who had recently been in uniform. Mama was on the phone with her cousin in Denver. The call kept dropping cell towers overloaded, but she managed fragments. "Come to Gloria's," she told me. Gloria has a basement. Her husband is a contractor. They have supplies. How far is Gloria from Denver? Lakewood, west side. That's another 5 hours if the roads hold. Then we drive 5 hours. I was calculating fuel. We had 3/4 of a tank. The Corolla got decent mileage. If nothing went wrong, if the highway stayed open, if there were gas stations that still functioned, we could make Denver by early afternoon. Everything depended on if. At 9:20, we passed through Española, and the highway opened, slightly fewer cars merging, the column thinning as vehicles peeled off onto local roads. I pushed the speed up to 50. The mountains to the east were blue-gray and indifferent, the same mountains that had watched the Pueblo Revolt and the atomic tests and every other catastrophe this land had absorbed. And they offered exactly the comfort that geography always offers, which is none. Mama's phone rang. She answered, and her face changed. Not collapsed, not brightened. Changed a tectonic shift beneath the surface features, the kind of change that comes from information that reconfigures everything. "Yes," she said. "Yes, where? How long ago?" She grabbed my arm. "Pull over." I pulled onto the shoulder. A line of cars streamed past us. Dust rose and settled. "It's Thomas," she said. My heart did something that hearts aren't supposed to do, stopped and surged simultaneously, a contradictory motion that left me dizzy. "He's alive." He called Gabriel. Gabriel's landline, Rosa's landline. "He's alive, Elena." "Where is he?" She listened for another 30 seconds, her eyes closed, tears running down her cheeks in 2 straight lines. Then she said, "Mijo, we are coming. We are on our way. Stay where you are. Stay exactly where you are." She hung up and pressed the phone against her chest with both hands. He got out of the terminal 12 hours ago. He and 4 others broke through a service door on the west side and crossed the tarmac in the dark. They reached a hangar. He's in a maintenance hangar on the far side of the airport with a group of survivors. 11 people. They have water from a utility sink and food from vending machines they broke open. He's alive. Diego made a sound from the back seat. Not a word. A sound, the sound of pressure releasing from a container that has been sealed too tight for too long. He pressed his face into his backpack and his shoulders shook, and Mama reached back and put her hand on his head. And for 30 seconds on the shoulder of Highway 285 in northern New Mexico. The 3 of us existed in a state that was not relief exactly, but was the raw material from which relief could eventually be built. Then Mama said, "He needs extraction. No one is coming for them. The military perimeter has contracted. They're outside the defended zone." And I understood that the information had not solved anything. It had only changed the shape of the problem. I sat on the shoulder of that highway with the engine idling and my hands on the wheel, and I felt the decision forming in my body before it reached my mind. It was physical. A tightening in the chest, an orientation, a compass needle, swinging. South, back, toward the thing we'd spent 30 hours running from. "We have to go get him," I said. Mama looked at me. Her cheeks were still wet. The tears had dried into salt lines on her skin, fine as cracks in old porcelain. "I know," she said. "You said it was wrong." "It was wrong yesterday. Yesterday he was in a sealed terminal and we had no information, and going back was a suicide drive into uncertainty. Today he is in a specific building, alive, with 11 other people, and no one is coming." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. The math changed. "The math?" I almost laughed. "Last night you said there was no math." "There wasn't. Now there is. A building number, a location, a count of survivors, a water source that will last approximately 4 more days. Those are numbers, Elena. I can calculate with those." She was already pulling up the map on her phone. The airport was a shape she could see concourses, hangars, taxiways, and the maintenance hangar Tomas had described was on the southwestern edge, separated from the main terminal by about a quarter mile of open tarmac. "The military perimeter," I said. "Gabriel said they're shooting." "Gabriel said they contracted the perimeter. Contracted means they pulled back. The hangar may be outside their line now. That's how Thomas got to it. It was already abandoned." "So the area between the perimeter and the hangar is open, undefended, which means no soldiers, but also no protection from them, the infected." "Yes." Diego leaned forward. "We're going back for Tomas." Mama turned. "Lena and I are going back. You are going to Denver, to Gloria." "No." "Diego." "No, I'm not going to Denver by myself. I'm 14. I can't drive. How would I even get there?" He had a point. The logistics of separating a 14-year-old from his family during a civilizational collapse were not simple. Bus routes weren't running. The only vehicle we had was the Corolla. Sending him north with strangers was unthinkable. "He comes with us," I said. "We stay together." "He's a child." "He's right here, and he can hear you," Diego said. His voice had an edge I hadn't heard before, not the petulant edge of a teenager, but something colder and more adult, the voice of someone who has decided that the protocol of being managed is no longer acceptable. Mama closed her eyes. I could see her running the calculation, the brutal arithmetic of risk and love that no spreadsheet can model. Take Diego south into the outbreak zone and risk all 3 of them. Send him north and lose him to the chaos of a fragmenting country. "We stay together," she said finally. "We stay together and we drive south and we get your brother and we drive back north. That's the plan. That's the only plan." I pulled back onto the highway. The cars streaming north honked as I waited for a gap to cross the median. Someone in a minivan stared at me with an expression of pure incomprehension, the face of a person watching another person swim against the current and unable to fathom why. I found the gap and crossed, and we were heading south on 285. The only car in the southbound lane. The pavement open and empty ahead of us, like a sentence no one else was willing to speak. In the mirror, Diego was sitting up straight, backpack on the seat beside him, watching the road ahead with that particular focus, the focus of a 14-year-old who has been told to be brave and has decided to be something more precise than brave. Present, alert, responsible for his own weight. Mama spread the map on her lap and began to calculate. Miles, fuel, time, routes. The numbers she hadn't had yesterday. The numbers that changed everything and solved nothing. We drove south into what we'd fled from. Highway 285 southbound was a ghost lane. Every vehicle was heading north. We passed hundreds of cars going the other direction, and not a single one going ours. The loneliness of that empty lane was its own kind of sound, a negative sound, the auditory equivalent of a blank page. And it said, "You are the only ones doing this. You are wrong to be doing this. Turn around." I didn't turn around. Mama had constructed a route. Not straight to El Paso that would mean I-25 south to YT-10 east, which would take us directly through the military perimeter and whatever had spilled beyond it. Instead, she plotted a route that swung wide through the desert east of the Jornada del Muerto Basin, skirting the restricted zone, approaching the airport from the south along Highway 54 through Oro Grande and the empty BLM land east of the Franklin Mountains. "This route is 270 miles, she said, on roads that may not be maintained, through desert that has no services. How much fuel do we need? More than we have. We need to fill up in Santa Fe." We stopped at a Conoco station on Cerrillos Road that was still operating but had a line 30 cars deep. Every pump had a vehicle. People were filling gas cans, filling spare tanks, filling anything that could hold fuel. A man was arguing with the attendant about a purchase limit. A woman was crying in a Jeep while her children watched from the back seat. We waited 40 minutes. I filled the tank and then filled the 2 water jugs Rosa had given us from her pantry. Mama went inside and bought every non-perishable item on the nearest shelf: granola bars, beef jerky, peanut butter crackers, a 6-pack of warm Gatorade. She paid with a credit card, and the machine took 17 seconds to process. And during those 17 seconds, I thought, if this declines, if the financial system has already collapsed, if the number on the screen just stays spinning, but it cleared. The receipt printed. Commerce was still functional, at least in this latitude, at least for now. We pulled out of the station and headed south on I-25. The road was emptier than 285 had been. Most of the traffic was on the smaller highways now. The main interstate too exposed, too obvious. I kept the speed at 65 and watched the horizon and listened to the silence that the 3 of us had built together. A silence that was no longer fearful, but operational. We were doing something. Forward motion toward a specific person in a specific place. The abstraction of dread had been replaced by the concreteness of a plan. And even though the plan was objectively insane, 2 women and a teenager driving a 2011 Toyota Corolla into a collapsing quarantine zone, it was ours. And it had shape, and shape was enough. South of Albuquerque, the city was visible to the west skyline, suburbs, the spread of human architecture across the valley floor. And I noticed smoke. Not a lot. Not the thick columns we'd seen on the El Paso broadcast. Just 3 thin plumes rising from different points in the metro area, widely spaced, almost elegant against the blue sky, like signal fires. Except these weren't signals. These were the early arithmetic of what Gabriel had described 3 or 4 entry points, each branching, each growing, each consuming the local population of the uninformed. Diego saw them too. "Is that Albuquerque?" "Yes." "Is it?" "I don't know. Probably." He was quiet for a moment. "We just came through there yesterday." "I know." "If we'd been a day slower..." "I know, Diego." He sat back and looked at the smoke and didn't say anything else. and I could feel him understanding, really understanding, not intellectually but physically, that the margin between survival and consumption was measured in hours, in decisions, in a single phone call from a brother at 5:47 in the morning, and that the margin was not earned. It was given, and you cannot repay a gift you didn't ask for. You can only carry it. We passed Albuquerque on the east side and kept driving south. We left the interstate south of Belen and took Highway 60 east toward Mountain Air. Then picked up a ranch road that Mama's map said would connect to Highway 54 south. The landscape changed. The irrigated valley floor gave way to dry grassland, then to raw desert creosote, cholla, the occasional juniper twisted by wind into shapes that looked like arthritic hands. The mountains to the west were distant and purple. The sky was enormous and empty and indifferent. The road was bad, not impassable, but rough, cracked asphalt patched with gravel. Sections where the shoulder had eroded and the pavement narrowed to barely one lane. The Corolla bounced and groaned, and Diego braced himself against the door frame. We saw our first infected at 2:15 p.m., 40 miles northeast of Tularosa. It was a man standing in the middle of the road. I saw him from maybe a quarter-mile out, a figure in the heat shimmer that at first looked like a post or a cactus, then resolved into a human shape as we got closer. He was wearing khaki pants and a white button-down shirt, the kind of clothes you'd wear to an office job. And the shirt was dark, with something down the front. He was standing perfectly still, facing our direction. And the stillness was the wrong kind, not the stillness of someone waiting or resting, but the stillness of something that has no reason to move, because the thing it's waiting for hasn't arrived yet. I slowed. Mama said, "Don't stop. He's in the road. Drive around him. Do not stop." I pulled to the left, onto the shoulder, giving him a wide berth. As we passed, I saw his face. His eyes were open and fixed and wrong, the pupils blown wide despite the blazing sun, the irises almost invisible. His mouth was open. There was tissue caught in his teeth, a fibrous pinkish material that I recognized with a lurch as muscle. And I looked away and pressed the accelerator. In the mirror, he turned, slowly. His head moved first, tracking the car, and then his body followed. And then he was walking. Not running. Walking, with a stride that had no urgency but also no fatigue. The stride of something that doesn't experience distance as an obstacle because it doesn't experience anything. "He's following," Diego said from the back. "He can't catch a car." "I know, but he's following. He turned and he's walking right at us." "Diego, look at me. He cannot catch us." "I know." But his voice was thin, and his hands were gripping the seatbelt across his chest, and his eyes were fixed on the mirror, watching the figure recede. And I understood that the terror of the first one is not about danger. It's about confirmation. You can watch footage, read reports, hear descriptions, and some insulating layer of disbelief remains. A membrane between you and the reality. The first one in person punctures that membrane. And what floods in is not fear, but knowledge. The specific, visceral knowledge that the world has changed at the species level and is not changing back. Mama crossed herself. One quick motion, forehead to chest, shoulder to shoulder. Then she checked the map. 50 miles to Highway 54, then south through Oro Grande to the desert approach. We should reach the outskirts of El Paso by dark. By dark. I thought about what the airport complex would look like at night, the hangars, the tarmac, the empty concourses lit by emergency generators or not lit at all. I thought about walking across a quarter-mile of open ground in the dark, toward a building I'd been inside exactly 4 times, guided by my mother's map and my brother's last known position. Mama, what if the hangar is surrounded? What if we get there, and what if they're around it? Then we'll figure it out when we see it. That's not a plan. It's what we have. Turn right at the next junction. I turned. The desert swallowed the road behind us. The man in the khaki pants was long gone from the mirror, but he was walking, and I knew he would keep walking, because they always do. That was the part nobody was prepared for. Not the violence, the patience. We reached the outskirts of the El Paso sprawl at 7:40 p.m. As the sun dropped behind the Franklin Mountains and turned the sky the color of a healing bruise, orange at the base, purple at the zenith, fading to black in the east. The temperature was still 102 degrees. The desert radiated heat like an opened furnace. The Corolla's temperature gauge was nudging toward the red, and I'd been nursing the engine for the last 30 miles, slowing on inclines, cutting the AC to reduce the load. Highway 54 had been empty for the last hour. No military, no civilians, no infected. Just road and rock and the occasional gas station, dark and abandoned, windows intact, pumps silent. The evacuation had passed through here like a wave and receded, leaving the infrastructure standing, but the people gone. The airport was visible from 10 miles out. Not the buildings, the lights. Military floodlights on tall, portable towers, arranged in a ring that cast a white perimeter glow against the dark sky. Inside the ring, I could see the terminal structures, the tower, the main concourse roofline, the curved silhouette of the parking garage. Outside the ring, to the south and west, the hangars and maintenance buildings sat in darkness. Tomas was in the darkness. Mama directed me off the highway onto a dirt road that ran along the base of a low mesa. We bumped over ruts and stones, the Corolla's undercarriage scraping. The headlights caught creosote bushes and wire fencing, and once a jackrabbit frozen in the beam, eyes burning green, before it bolted. We stopped behind a water treatment building half a mile from the airport's southwestern perimeter fence. The building was cinder block, single-story, industrial. Mama had identified it on the satellite map as the last piece of cover before the open ground. I turned off the engine. The silence was vast. The military lights hummed distantly, a low electrical drone, but the space between us and the airport was dark and still. The maintenance hangar is there. Mama pointed. In the darkness, I could see the outline of a large rectangular structure, maybe a quarter mile from the fence. Building 7-South. Tomas said the door they entered through is on the east face, facing the tarmac. What's between us and it? Fence, then open ground, gravel and concrete, maybe a taxiway, then the hangar. And between the fence and the hangar, what might be walking around out there? She didn't answer. The answer was obvious. Diego said, "I'm coming." "No," Mama and I said simultaneously. "You can't leave me in the car." "You stay in the car. You lock the doors. You lie down in the back seat so no one can see you. If we're not back in 1 hour, you drive north." "I can't drive." "You can. I taught you in the church parking lot last spring. You remember. Brake, gas, steering. Stay under 40. Drive north on 54 until you reach a town with people and you ask for help." His face in the dimness was all jaw and eyes. His father's jaw, his mother's eyes. "I don't want to be alone." "I know. What if you don't come back? Then you drive. That's the job. You don't wait and you don't come looking. You drive." He nodded. It was a terrible nod, the nod of a child accepting an adult assignment that no child should carry. But he was Tomas's brother. And Tomas had told him to be brave. And bravery in our family is not loud. It is a nod in a dark car and a hand on the steering wheel, and the willingness to be the one who was left behind. Mama and I got out. The air was oven hot and dry, the desert radiating its stored thermal energy into the night. I could hear the floodlights humming. I could hear, distantly, what might have been helicopter rotors or might have been wind. Mama had a flashlight from Rosa's house. I had a tire iron from the Corolla's trunk. We had nothing else. We walked toward the fence. The fence was chain link, 8 feet tall, topped with barbed wire. It was airport perimeter fencing designed to keep out trespassers, not to withstand a siege. Mama found a section near a drainage culvert where the bottom had been peeled back, probably by coyotes or by someone who had already come this way. She pulled the chain link up, and I crawled under, then held it for her. On the other side, the ground was different. Flat, paved in sections, gravel in others. We were on the airport property now, in the operational zone south of the runways. The hangar was ahead of us, a dark mass against the slightly less dark sky, its roof edge a straight line, interrupting the stars. We moved slowly. Mama's flashlight was off. We couldn't risk being seen, not by the military and not by whatever else was on this ground. The moon was a crescent, barely useful. I walked with the tire iron in my right hand and my left hand extended, touching Mama's shoulder, maintaining contact. At about 200 yards from the fence, we heard the first sound. Not a moan, that's the movie version, the cartoon version. This was a clicking, a rhythmic dental clicking, like someone tapping their teeth together with mechanical regularity. And it was coming from our left, maybe 30 yards away, in the direction of a parked fuel truck, whose silhouette I could barely make out. We stopped. The clicking continued. It had no variation, no pattern, just the same interval, the same duration, over and over, like a metronome made of bone. Mama squeezed my arm. We moved right, away from the sound, curving our path toward the hangar from a wider angle. My feet on the gravel sounded enormous. Every step was an announcement. I tried to walk on the paved sections where the noise was less, but the pavement was cracked and uneven, and I stumbled once, catching myself on Mama's arm, and the tire iron rang against the concrete with a sound that seemed to carry for miles. The clicking stopped. We froze. Silence. 10 seconds. 20. I could hear my own blood in my ears, could hear Mama's breath, could hear the distant generators of the military perimeter. The fuel truck was a shadow in the corner of my vision. The clicking resumed. Same rhythm, same direction. It hadn't moved. We kept walking. The hangar emerged from the darkness like a wall rising out of the ground. Its corrugated metal siding was warm to the touch when I reached out and pressed my palm against it. We moved along the east face, looking for the door Thomas had described. It was a service door, personnel-sized, with a push bar. Mama knocked. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks, the pattern she'd agreed on during the phone call, the oldest and simplest of codes, the kind of thing a mother invents because she cannot not try to impose order on chaos. Nothing happened for 10 seconds. Then a lock turned. The door opened inward, and the darkness inside was different from the darkness outside, denser, warmer, smelling of jet fuel and sweat and bodies. A flashlight hit my face. Behind it, a voice I didn't recognize. "Who?" "His family," Mama said. "Where's my son?" A shuffle, movement. Then Tomas's voice from somewhere deeper in the hangar. And his voice was different, thinner, rougher, stripped of the flat authority it had carried on the phone 2 mornings ago. And he said, "Mama." She pushed past the flashlight and into the dark, and I heard the sound of their collision bodies meeting, arms closing, the particular percussion of an embrace between two people who had genuinely believed they would never touch each other again. Tomas made a sound I'd never heard from him, a sound I can't replicate and won't try to describe, because some sounds belong only to the moment that created them, and reducing them to language is a kind of theft. I stepped inside. The door closed behind me. Someone locked it. I stood in the dark hangar that smelled like fuel and fear and 11 people's accumulated survival, and I pressed my hand against the wall and breathed. The hangar held 11 people before we arrived. With us, 14. Tomas pulled me into the hug after Mama, and I felt his body against mine, thinner than I remembered, vibrating with a low, constant tension. The tension of a man who has been awake for 40 hours and running on cortisol and vending machine Gatorade. His left arm was bandaged. Not bitten, he'd cut it on a torn metal edge during the escape from the terminal. He smelled like sweat and industrial cleanser and something darker underneath. Something I associated with hospitals, with places where the body's failures are managed rather than hidden. "I told you not to come," he said into my hair. "I know. I told you to go north." "We did. Then we came back." He pulled away and looked at me in the flashlight's ambient glow. His face was gaunt. His eyes were red-rimmed and wide and had that particular quality, the quality of having seen things that have permanently reformatted the visual cortex, images that cannot be unfiled. "You drove here, through the desert, with Mama?" "And Diego." His face changed again. "Where is Diego?" "In the car, half a mile south, behind the water treatment building." "You left him alone?" "He's locked in. He has instructions." "He's 14, Lena. I know how old he is. I also know that I couldn't bring him across that ground, and I couldn't leave him in Santa Fe, and I couldn't send him to Denver alone. I made a decision with the options I had. It wasn't a good decision. It was the only one." He stared at me. Then he nodded a slow, surrendering nod. The nod of someone who recognizes the geometry of impossible choices because he'd been making them for 2 days. The other survivors were arranged around the hangar in small clusters. 2 airport maintenance workers who knew the building. A family of 3, mother, father, young boy, maybe 6, who had been in the terminal when it fell and had followed Tomas through the service corridors. An elderly man who had been a passenger on the Lima flight but hadn't been infected and had hidden in a bathroom for 14 hours before Thomas found him. 2 TSA officers, one of whom had a broken collarbone. A pilot who had never made it to her plane. They watched us from the edges of the flashlight beams. Their faces held the expression of people who have been forgotten by the system and know it not anger, not despair, but a resigned alertness. The expression of animals in a shelter who look up when the door opens and don't know yet if it's food or something worse. Tomas led us to the back of the hangar, where he'd set up a rough command post, a folding table, a hand-crank radio, bottles of water, the remnants of vending machine food. He'd been organized. Even in collapse, even in the dark, his TSA training had asserted itself: inventories, schedules, watch rotations. "We have water for 3 more days," he said. "Food for 2. There's no electricity. The generators are on the main terminal grid, and that's gone. No cell service. The radio picks up military frequencies, but they're encrypted. All I've heard in plain language is a single broadcast repeating on loop. All civilians to proceed to designated evacuation points north of Las Cruces." "So there are evacuation points?" "There are. But they're 50 miles north of here, and the ground between is compromised. The infected are spread across the eastern approach roads. Not dense, not like in the terminal, but enough. Clusters near vehicles, near bodies, near anything that drew them during the initial surge. We drove through. We saw one. You saw one because you were in a car. On foot, you'll see more. He looked at Mama. You shouldn't have come. Mama took his face in both hands, the gesture she'd been making since he was a child, the gesture that meant, I am looking at you, and you are here, and that is sufficient. And she said, you are my son. Don't tell me what I should not have done. He closed his eyes. His shoulders dropped. For the first time, in 2 days, the tension in his body released, not fully, but enough. We were together. We were in a dark hangar surrounded by a broken city. We had a car half a mile away with a 14-year-old at the wheel and a quarter tank of gas. It was not enough, but it was a start, and starts are what my family does. We got them out, not all at once and not cleanly. 3 trips across that dark ground over 2 nights, 5 people per run. Diego driving the Corolla in terrified silence to the water treatment building and back. The elderly passenger died of cardiac arrest during the 2nd trip, not from a bite, but from a body that had simply reached its limit. We carried his name north. Martin Alvarez, 68, a grandfather from Lima, who survived the flight in the terminal and the hangar and the tarmac, and didn't survive the back seat of a Toyota. Tomas rides in silence now. He works at a distribution center in Colorado Springs, scanning boxes, wearing gloves over hands that still shake. He doesn't talk about the terminal. I don't ask. What I carry is specific. It's the 6 hours between his call and the closure of the highway, the exact margin he bought us, with his voice at 5:47 in the morning. He spent that call on us instead of on escape. He chose the phone over the door. I didn't ask him to, and he didn't ask me whether I wanted to be someone who was saved instead of someone who saved. That's the thing about being someone's younger sister. The debt is older than you are.